Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 54 of The Captain's Heart. And I did not bring that up. Jeremy was amused by Gralgiran's insistence to accompany him to the psychologist for his session. Okay, for his Kelsirian session. Implantation. He'd explained that he had the tablet, and the quite basic Kelsirian his first session had given him was enough to have it lead him there. He'd also pointed out Gralgiran could be late, would be late for his work as captain. That made his heart laugh. There were hours still before the start of third shift, which was the shift they worked. Jeremy had enough time to get over the aphasia that resulted from the implanting, and he had time to escort him there, get some training in, and possibly hang out with a friend if one of them was free. The session was much like the previous one. They even napped. Although this time it was out of boredom. The aphasia was total. He couldn't even read the screen or tell the tablet what he might want to watch. Not that there had been anything. The only Kelsirian movie, ballads as they called them, hadn't inspired him to watch another. He'd told himself he'd do a search for comedies as the aphasia faded, but then one of the counselor had woken him, and since he'd been able to understand that a shift was going to start soon, so he should head to work, Jeremy just did just that, using the tablet to plot a route. It wasn't the most efficient one, but it consisted of the fewest turn, which he figured meant the least ways for him to get lost. Engineering, when he reached it, was deserted. It reminded him of okay, of when he'd come to work on the reactor and the clock station had aligned to the middle of the night on the ship, of which fourth shift was basically consisted of. He was surprised Gralgiran worked this shift. As the captain, he'd expected him, he'd expected, okay. As the captain, he'd expected him to have a daytime one. He figured having the place to himself meant he'd get more work done, but encountered the problem of not having his tools, not knowing where the tools were stored, and not knowing the Kelsirian words for those he needed to get his work done. So he couldn't ask where they were stored. He asked for engineering tool storage and got 16 locations throughout the ship. He decided to check the closest one when Turek entered engineering. When Turek entered, unlike Jeremy's first arrival, which had coincided with Turek's sleep, this time his vest was right side on. "Do you have a scanner telling you when I've stepped on in here?" His friend smiled. The captain's work shift is well known. I figured you'd work the same one. Near agreed for us to adjust accordingly. We're still transitioning, so I'm later than I planned. It won't happen again, engineer. It's Jeremy. Near is really short, so someone you care a lot. You care about a lot. Your heart? Thoric shook his head. My mate. I've never felt the need to hunt for my heart. I'm perfectly happy with her, and now that you are part of the crew here, you are the engineer, and I must address you as such. Okay, fine. It's definitely not my place to force you to ignore rank, although I think it's counterproductive. Since you're here, I need your help building a toolkit. I don't have the technical knowledge yet. Technical words. It's not knowledge. He's got the knowledge, he just doesn't know how to translate it. I don't have the technical words yet to ask the system for them. Before we do that, there is something you need to address. The Kelsirian motion to the empty room. Are you going? You are going to have to be more detailed in your explanation. Either the implementation hasn't given me what that means yet, or it doesn't do all the social stuff you take for granted, clerk. You should address me as technician. No. Jeremy was surprised at how annoyed he was at the suggestion. I'm not going to reduce a friend to being a title. That's final, he snapped as his friend opened his muzzle. Turk nodded. What I meant is that as the engineer, you need to assign the personnel who work here. Didn't the engineer do that already? The captain overrode it while we were on the station. Okay, then can't you just go back to what it was before that? Only the engineer has the authority to change what the captain sets. You are kidding me. This rank thing means that you aren't going to go back to what you know works unless I tell you? What if I wasn't there? What would you do until the engineer was back? I would contact the captain and explain the required changes so he could implement them. Why you and not one of the other technicians? Because I am also a hunter and he my alpha. If there was another hunter among the technicians, we would compare who has had the most interaction with the alpha or whose beta is closest to the alpha to determine which of us should approach him. Jimmy rubbed his temple. This rank thing is needlessly complicated. Can you just can I just tell you to get everything back to the way it was? No, engineer. You get that I have no idea how you work, right? Back on the station, all I need to do is tell one of the techs that what I want them to do, and they did everything else that was needed to make that happen. You were the engineer. No, I wasn't. You rubbed his temple again. This was a waste of time. He didn't like the system, but it was what he needed to work within. Hopefully, there was a manual somewhere about the social intricacies of rank. Knowing how things worked would make it more tolerable. Okay, I need to know what I'm expected to do. How many should be working? Each shift needs a minimum of 9 technicians. We are at 11 for each shift, for each of them. That's the advantage of putting... What's the advantage of putting all 11 to work if 9 is all that's required? It eases the burden on everyone. That was one aspect Kelsirian culture the station could benefit from adopting. Before she went on vacation, he and Amanda had to fight over who got the text when they both had projects going at the same time. How do I go about making that schedule? Where am I going to find the technician's name? Better yet, the previous schedule so I can just make that the official one. Turix nodded to the long window high on the wall. It made sense that would be in the office. I asked to be transferred to 4th shift. Wait. Am I screwing this up? There were hours before the start of 3rd shift. Right. I did screw that up. All right. Da, 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 da. Okay. Um, Makes sense. I asked to be transferred to third shift. Aren't you already assigned to work when I do? Isn't this why you're here right now? I was assigned to you as a hunter by the Alpha. That role allowed me to change when I worked as needed. That is no longer applicable. Gralgiran had assigned Thuric as his minder. Made sense. Was your job to keep me from finishing the repairs? If it was required, I was to delay the completion until the hunt was over. Which you won't tell me what it was about. You haven't asked your heart? Thuric sounded surprised. He chuckled. So much come up since I moved in with him. I haven't thought about it. Okay. How do I find out who's willing to change shift with you? The confused expression Thuric gave him made Jeremy grind his teeth. I can't just pick someone at random on third shift and tell them they now work second shift. Anytime Dr. Manuel had needed to make adjustments to the tech's schedule, it had been days of discussion and arguments. And for at least a week after it was agreed to, productivity was down. What are the Turk trailed you are the Turk trailed off as Jeremy narrowed his eyes. I can, he said reluctantly, talk with a technician who were on third shift and see if one of them is interested in working second shift. Jeremy handed him the tablet. We're all give me some write all their names. It's going to give me something to reference if I need help working out what's this out what meh help working yeah, help finding the schedules file. If I need help finding the schedules file, the schedules file. Turk typed quickly, then returned it. I will see to gathering tools for you while you work. Turk, he called as his friend headed away, then found he had no idea what to say when he stopped and turned. He didn't like the rigidity in the stance. He'd enjoyed working alongside a friend instead of a co-worker or now a subordinate. He'd never given thought to running a lab, of having people officially under him. The techs on the station were Dr. Manuel's responsibility. Forget about it. The office was as he'd seen it last, when he and Gralgiran had. His face heated at the memory. He walked around the larger space than he felt he needed. The console had the standard 35 key as well as more with symbols instead of letters. Technical stuff, he figured. At the back, against the long wall, was the toilet, with its sink, a small cabinet, and towels, and a disposal access. The office had 3 dedicated printers and 2 drafting tables. He could guess at the controls based on the ones he'd worked with on the station, but would wait until the language imprinting covered them unless he had no choice. The typing tips gripped his fingers snugly. He'd tested them by flinging his head around to see if it would dislodge. And they hadn't. He sat, and with the tap of a random key, the screen showed him a list of files. Without demanding, he proved who he was. How trusting were they? Struck him as odd. He trusted the techs who needed to be in his lab well enough to leave them unsupervised, but he'd lock the access to his research and schematics. The door had a lock, but Was that and the respect for rank really enough? It had to be, no matter how unsettling it felt. Typing proved to be an adventure. The language and printing hadn't given him the associated typing skills. He'd have to ask the psychologist if that came later or was a different set of imprint. Well, he was slow. The words themselves were easy to type when he knew them. The Kelsirian alphabet was purely phonetic and had fewer sounds than the English language. The search was slow. He didn't have the knowledge yet to let him access the more advanced functions, and each name he entered brought up dozens of results in no order he could identify. He figured there was a way to have the result in chronological order, but he didn't know how yet. When he found it, adjusting the schedule was simply moving Turk's name to third shift, and he couldn't make it he couldn't make it official, and it was. Each shift would have more than 9, but it felt unfair to set it only to change it in a couple of days. The door opened. Engineer? Come in, Turk. You weren't answering. I didn't hear anything. Turk reached out, and Jeremy barely made out a tone. If that's not defective, the engineer has better hearing than I do. We might hear a different range of frequencies. I'll have to check. He offered the bag. It was similar in size to Jeremy's, but the material seemed to be closer to leather than the reinforced polymer it had been made from. Asherik Toroborek has agreed to work second shift, so I can take third. He looked at the name and moved it. Done. How do I make this official? Send it to us. Jeremy leveled his gaze on his friend. And how do I do that? If there's a step-by-step on this screen, I can't make it out. Turek hesitated, and Jeremy stood. Sit. His friend did so hesitatingly. If it needs some login or authentication, I can't help you with that. Otherwise, just send it so I can call this done and get back to fixing the reactor. And this concludes chapter 54 of The Captain's Heart. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available on Ream Story. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.